The Shadowed Mind, a journey through the history of the paranormal and psychic phenomena. Introduction. Below is a lengthy multi-part narrative tracing the biographical history of the paranormal and psychic traditions from the dawn of recorded history in ancient Egypt all the way to the present day. This account emphasizes not only historically verifiable events, but also the stories, legends, frauds, unresolved mysteries, and the personalities who shaped humanity's fascination with what lies beyond the realm of ordinary senses. Written in a narrative form, this history aims to be both compelling and scrupulously informative, weaving lesser-known details into a coherent, centuries-spanning tapestry. Part 1. Ancient Egypt. The cradle of supernatural belief. It begins, as so many stories do, along the banks of a great river. The Nile, winding through the desert expanses of northeastern Africa, was not just a source of sustenance for the people of ancient Egypt. It was also a conduit for myth, magic, and mysteries that transcended the mortal plane. From the earliest dynasties, around 3100 BCE, to the final collapse of the ancient Egyptian civilization in the 7th century CE, Egyptians lived in a world that shimmered with divine presence, divine intercession, and the seeds of psychic thought. Ancient Egyptian religion was a complex tapestry of gods and goddesses who governed every aspect of life, from the rising of the sun, Ra, to the underworld transitions of the dead, Osiris. It is here that we find some of the world's earliest references to afterlife beliefs and rituals that would later be mirrored in spiritualist practices, albeit thousands of years afterward. The Egyptians believed not only in immortality of the soul, but also in its capacity to communicate, exert influence, and sometimes even haunt the living. The oldest known references to what might be considered psychic phenomena appear in tomb inscriptions and certain papyri that mention dream messages and omens from the dead. Priests served as intermediaries between mortals and gods, and many performed rituals aimed at summoning or interpreting the will of the divine. The priestly class had knowledge of medicinal and magical practices preserved in texts such as the Ebers Papyrus, c. 1550 BCE, which contained spells, incantations, and prescriptions that blurred the line between science and magic. One of the lesser-known texts that references proto-psychic practices is the Book of the Temple, fragments of which detail certain opening-of-the-mouth ceremonies. These rites, performed on mummies, were intended to liberate the deceased's ability to speak in the afterlife. Today, some scholars point to this and other ritual passages as embryonic evidence of a deep-seated cultural acceptance that communication with the other side was possible and, in some sense, normal. Oracles and the rise of Egyptian seers. We often associate oracles with ancient Greece, but there is evidence that Egypt had its own oracular traditions. The Temple of Amun at Siwa Oasis, located in the Western Desert, became famous for its oracle. Even Alexander the Great is said to have visited Siwa in 332 BCE to consult the oracle about his divine lineage. Egyptian oracles typically involved a statue of a deity, Amun, Bastet, or another major god, which would be carried in a ceremonial bark. Priests would interpret the statue's movements as messages from the deity, thus giving answers or advice to petitioners. While these events often took place under the watchful eye of priests, there exist records suggesting that, on occasion, certain individuals, gifted with a prophetic sight, might speak in a trance-like state. The details are murky, largely because these practices were not systematically recorded in a tradition that prized official temple ceremonies over personal expressions of mysticism. Nonetheless, references to such episodes dot the edges of Egyptian records, a testament to the human hunger for glimpses into the unknown. Magic healers and court sorcerers. In the court of Pharaoh Khufu, 2589–2566 BCE, 4th dynasty, legends speak of a sorcerer named Dedi, reputed to have the power to reattach a severed head to a body, human or animal. Whether Dedi truly existed or was a legendary figure is still debated, but he survives in various papyrus texts. In these stories, the pharaoh is depicted as seeking out Dedi's counsel, not just for spectacle, but for profound knowledge. possibly including communications with the spirits of the departed. Magic in ancient Egypt, referred to as Heka, was a deeply ingrained system that encompassed spoken spells, written amulets, ritual gestures, and the use of magically charged objects. While we cannot speak of an Egyptian psychic in the modern sense, certain individuals specialized in protective, curative, and divinatory rites, acting much like shamans. They relied on a combination of incantations, psychoactive substances, occasionally used in ointments or fumigations, and deep knowledge of hieroglyphic spells. One intriguing but lesser-known figure is Harkhuf, an official of the 6th dynasty, c. 2300 BCE, known for his autobiographical inscriptions in his tomb at Kubbat el-Hawa near Aswan. Though primarily famous for leading trade expeditions, some lines of his inscription suggest that Harkhuf occasionally brought back wonders from foreign lands. Certain historians speculate these wonders may have included oracular objects, rare substances used in magical rites, or even spiritual specialists, individuals from Nubia or further south who had knowledge of different magical traditions. Death, afterlife, and haunting. At the heart of Egypt's relationship with the supernatural lay the elaborate cult of the dead. Tombs were not only repositories for the deceased's earthly belongings, but also considered abodes for their spirit, K, and luminous essence, Bay. The Egyptians left letters in tombs, requesting assistance from the departed or admonishing them for haunting the living. One chilling yet fascinating papyrus, often referred to as the Complaint of the Ghost text, dating to the Middle Kingdom c. 2000 BCE, describes a spirit complaining about the neglect of its tomb. In the papyrus, the ghost urges the living to rectify the tomb's conditions so it can rest. This document underscores just how integrated the idea of an interactive spirit realm was in Egyptian society. People truly believed that spirits could send messages, cause harm, or bestow blessings. Moreover, it wasn't all blind faith. The complex judicial system in Egypt sometimes dealt with curses, possessions, and spirit-related infractions. If a person believed they had been cursed by an enemy, they could appeal to temple authorities, who might conduct rituals to identify and counteract malevolent magic. This quasi-legal recognition of supernatural interference is an early example of a broader phenomenon, the cultural acceptance that unseen forces could deeply impact daily life. The demise of ancient Egypt and the survival of its mysteries. Over the centuries, foreign powers, Persians, Greeks, Romans, and eventually Arabs conquered Egypt. While religious practices transformed under each regime, traces of the old beliefs never fully vanished. By the time Christianity and later Islam became dominant, many Egyptian magical texts and relics were buried, destroyed, or deliberately hidden. Yet the thread of esoteric knowledge continued, quietly persisting among local healers, folk magicians, and secretive groups of Coptic Christians who inherited ritual practices that, consciously or not, borrowed from ancient temple rites. Among these survivals is a curious magical tradition known as Coptic binding spells, found in a handful of manuscripts dating to the 4th–7th centuries CE. These texts, written in Coptic, the latest stage of the Egyptian language, depict formulaic requests to saints and archangels, but use incantations and symbolic drawings reminiscent of pharaonic magic. While not precisely psychic phenomena, these binding spells highlight how ancient Egyptian ideas about spiritual influence and communication persisted far beyond the heyday of the pyramids. Thus, the cradle of supernatural belief in the West was lined with Egyptian linen, inscribed with hieroglyphs that told of gods, spirits, dreams, and oracles. For the Egyptians, the veil between the seen and the unseen was fluid and permeable, setting the stage for centuries of fascination with the paranormal. Part 2. Ancient Greece and Rome, the origins of Western mysticism. As the torch of civilization passed from the Egyptians to the peoples around the Mediterranean, two cultures emerged that would lay much of the foundation for Western thought, Greece and Rome. Between these two civilizations, an intertwined tapestry of mythology, philosophy, and supernatural belief took shape, greatly influencing our modern concepts of the paranormal. The Oracle of Delphi, a living bridge to Apollo. No exploration of psychic phenomena in the ancient world is complete without mentioning the Oracle of Delphi. High on the slopes of Mount Parnassus in central Greece stood the Temple of Apollo, where the Pythia, the high priestess, served as the mouthpiece of the god. From approximately the 8th century BCE to the 4th century CE, she would answer questions brought by individuals, city-states, and even foreign kings. The process was steeped in ritual. After ritual purification in the Castalian spring, the Pythia would descend into the adyton, inner chamber of the temple. Myths claim she chewed laurel leaves or inhaled vapors rising from a chasm beneath the temple. In her trance, she would utter ecstatic proclamations that priests then interpreted for petitioners. While modern research suggests that ethylene or other gases may have induced her hallucinatory state, the ancient Greeks believed wholeheartedly in her direct communication with Apollo. Notably, the Pythia was typically a woman past childbearing age and of local origin, further adding a shroud of mystique around her. While oracular statements were sometimes vague, they held enormous sway over the political, military, and spiritual decisions of the Greek world. Some historians argue that Delphi's influence shaped critical junctures in Greek history, like the decision to fight the Persians at Salamis, 480 BCE, thereby changing the course of Western civilization. Mystery cults and spiritual initiation. Ancient Greece was also home to mystery religions, initiatory cults that promised privileged secret knowledge and a better afterlife to their adherents. The most famous were the Eleusinian mysteries, dedicated to Demeter and Persephone. While we lack comprehensive records due to the vow of secrecy, participants in these rites reported profound spiritual experiences that some have compared to near-death experiences or modern mystical states. In the Eleusinian mysteries, participants underwent a series of purifications, processions, and a final revelation in the telesterion, the ceremonial hall. While historians debate whether any psychoactive substances were used, the famous kykeon drink might have contained ergot or other psychedelics, it's clear the experience was transformative. Ancient authors, from Plato to Aristophanes, reference it with reverence, implying that initiates gleaned knowledge of life, death, and rebirth. Beyond Eleusis, the Orphic and Dionysian cults also dabbled in esoteric knowledge, with rumors of mediumistic trance, prophesying, and direct contact with the divine. Practices within these cults sometimes involved intense emotional catharsis, possibly bridging altered states of consciousness reminiscent of modern spiritualist séances or shamanic journeys. Philosophers' pursuit of the soul. While the average Greek might consult oracles or participate in mystery rites, the philosophers, those like Pythagoras, Plato, and later Plotinus, engaged the supernatural with more systematic inquiry. Pythagoras, 6th century BCE, is famous for his mathematical contributions, but he also founded a quasi-religious community that explored transmigration of souls and esoteric secrets of harmonic resonance. Legend holds that he could recall past lives, a claim that, if true, stands among the earliest Western records of reincarnation-based beliefs. Plato's dialogues grapple with the concept of an immaterial soul that exists independently of the body. In works like the Phaedo, Plato suggests that the soul is imprisoned in the body and glimpses the realm of perfect forms only fleetingly. This philosophical framework indirectly validated the possibility that one might access hidden truths, perhaps through a form of clairvoyance or divine inspiration. Later, in the Roman period, Plotinus, 3rd century CE, and the Neoplatonists refined Plato's metaphysics into a system that emphasized union with the One, a transcendent source. Some adherents practiced theurgy, a set of rituals aimed at invoking gods or demons to elevate the soul. While not widespread, these theurgic practices suggested that humans could interact with spiritual beings, achieving ecstatic states that might yield prophetic insights, an approach bearing an uncanny resemblance to modern channeling. Roman adaptations and imperial prophecy. With the rise of the Roman Empire, Greek spiritual practices mingled with Etruscan, Egyptian, and various provincial beliefs. Divination took many forms: the official reading of animal entrails, haruspicy, the interpretation of bird flights, augury, dream analysis, and the consultation of prophetic texts like the Sibylline books. The Sibylline oracles, believed to be the utterances of divinely inspired prophetesses known as Sibyls, held a revered place in Roman state religion. Although the earliest Sibylline books were said to have been bought by King Tarquin from the Cumaean Sibyl, in a story reminiscent of a cunning negotiation, they influenced Roman politics for centuries. Periodically, during moments of national crisis, the Roman Senate would consult them, gleaning instructions on the performance of particular rituals or the introduction of new gods into the Roman pantheon. One lesser-known figure in the Roman realm of the paranormal is Apollonius of Tyana, 1st century CE. A philosopher of the Pythagorean tradition, Apollonius is credited with miraculous healings, the ability to vanish from locked prisons, and feats of precognition. Legends claim he once conversed with the spirit of a dead youth and performed exorcisms reminiscent of early Christian accounts of demonic possession. His biography, penned by Philostratus, presents Apollonius as a sort of pagan holy man, a teacher, miracle worker, and mystical visionary. While Christian writers often dismissed him as a sorcerer, Apollonius's life story circulated widely in the ancient world, stoking rumors that rivaled the miracles of Jesus. Mystics and magicians at the crossroads. As Christianity began to rise in the 1st–4th centuries CE, pagan practices, from oracles to household spells, did not abruptly vanish. Instead, they went underground or syncretized with the new faith. Some Christian holy men in late antiquity adopted or adapted Roman magical formulas, possibly justifying them by substituting the names of saints for the old gods. A fascinating example is the phenomenon of incubation, originally practiced in temples dedicated to the healing god Asclepius. The sick would sleep in the temple, hoping for a dream vision of the deity who might cure them. Early Christian communities likewise began to venerate the tombs of saints. Some believers would spend the night there in prayer, seeking miraculous healing or guidance through dreams, effectively repurposing an ancient pagan practice into a Christian context. By the close of antiquity, the stage was set for the Middle Ages, a tumultuous era in which the paranormal would often be framed in terms of heresy and witchcraft. Yet the legacy of the ancients never fully disappeared. From the oracles of Delphi to the Sibylline books, from Pythagoras to Apollonius of Tyana, the Greek and Roman worlds planted seeds of Western mysticism, shaping how later generations would understand the possibility of speaking with gods or gleaning glimpses of future events. Part 3. Medieval Europe and the Early Renaissance. Faith, Fear, and Hidden Light. As the Roman Empire fragmented and the so-called Dark Ages settled upon Europe, 5th–10th centuries CE, the pursuit of esoteric knowledge, prophecy, and psychic inquiry did not wholly disappear. Instead, it intertwined with a predominantly Christian worldview that was both fearful of heresy and yet open to miracles and revelations. Monastic mysticism and revelatory visions. Medieval Europe teemed with accounts of visions and revelations, many occurring within monastic settings. Monks and nuns embraced the possibility that God or the saints could grant them special insight, often through dreams or waking trances. Perhaps the most famous figure in this regard is Hildegard of Bingen, 1098–1179, a Benedictine abbess whose visionary experiences and theological writings left a profound mark on Christian mysticism. From childhood, Hildegard experienced vivid visions that she interpreted as messages from the divine. She recorded them in works such as Chivius, dictating cryptic yet powerful images of fiery lights, swirling cosmic spheres, and angelic choirs. While these experiences were attributed to divine revelation rather than any innate psychic ability, the underlying mechanics, receiving telepathic or clairvoyant-like messages, strongly resemble later notions of mediumship. Hildegard was not alone. Bridget of Sweden, 1303–1373, also reported frequent mystical revelations and dialogues with Christ and the Virgin Mary, which shaped her religious activism. In an era when church doctrine was the final authority, these visionaries navigated a fine line between revered prophetess and suspected heretic. The persistence of pagan wisdom and folklore. Though the church dominated intellectual life, Pockets of pagan folklore and local superstition endured throughout medieval Europe. Village healers, often called cunning folk in England, offered herbal remedies, love charms, and protective talismans. Their practices might include scrying, gazing into mirrors, water, or crystals to foresee events, a skill that future occultists would later formalize. In Celtic regions, the ancient belief in thin places, where the boundary between the human world and the other world was tenuous, persisted, leading to tales of fairy folk, ghosts, and shapeshifters. Oral traditions spoke of second sight, an alleged ability among certain families in the Scottish Highlands to see omens or foresee deaths. Though overshadowed by Christian orthodoxy, these beliefs quietly maintained the idea that some individuals had an intrinsic gift for perceiving the unseen. Islamic scholarship and the transmission of esoteric knowledge. While Western Europe struggled through periods of intellectual stagnation, the Islamic world blossomed with scholarship in fields like astronomy, mathematics, medicine, and philosophy. Within these centers of learning, particularly in places like Baghdad, Cordoba, and Cairo, classical Greek texts were translated into Arabic, preserving and expanding upon works by Plato, Aristotle, and Plotinus. In addition to preserving Greek philosophy, Islamic scholars contributed significantly to esoteric fields like alchemy and astrology. Figures such as Jabir ibn Hayyan, c. 8th–9th century, and Al-Kindi, 801–873, wrote treatises that fused empirical investigation with mystical speculation. Ibn Sina, Avicenna, 980–1037, the famous polymath, explored the nature of the soul, suggesting that the human intellect could, under certain conditions, attain knowledge beyond mere sensory experience, an idea reminiscent of clairvoyance. These works, many of which remained in Arabic until the later medieval period, would eventually find their way back into Christian Europe via translations in Spain and Sicily. When Latin translations proliferated in the 12th and 13th centuries, they sparked a revival of classical learning, one that also reintroduced esoteric ideas of prophecy, astral influence, and the possibility of hidden knowledge. Necromancy and heresy in late medieval Europe. By the 13th century, the Latin West was rediscovering ancient texts on magic and astrology. The Church, increasingly concerned with theological orthodoxy, found itself in a bind. Certain forms of divination and ritual magic were tolerated if they could be framed in a Christian context, for example, invoking angels for protection, while others were condemned outright. This tension gave rise to the term necromancy, derived from the Greek necromantia, divination by the dead. In medieval usage, however, necromancy often encompassed a broad range of prohibited rites, astrological summoning, demon conjuration, and attempts at manipulating spirits. Manuals like the Sworn Book of Honorius or the Munich Manual of Demonic Magic, also called Liber Incantationum, circulated among learned clerics, describing complex ceremonies to invoke angels or demons for knowledge or power. Though these grimoires can read like pure fantasy to modern eyes, they demonstrate that certain scholars, and sometimes even clergy, sought secret methods to see the future, influence fate, and communicate with non-human entities. Many of them insisted they did so for pious ends, but the Church was not always convinced. Heresy trials occasionally featured accusations of black magic, further conflating any psychic or mystical claim with diabolic influence. The dawn of the Renaissance and new currents. As Europe edged toward the Renaissance, 14th–17th centuries, intellectual curiosity awakened. The rediscovery of Plato and the flourishing of Hermetic texts, attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, stoked a fascination with natural magic. Philosophers like Marsilio Ficino, 1433–1499, and Giovanni Pico della Mirandola, 1463–1494, championed a Platonic revival in Florence, weaving astrology, alchemy, and Christian theology into a grand tapestry they called the Prisca Theologia, the idea that all religions and philosophies share a single, ancient truth. Ficino, a priest and philosopher, translated the Hermetic corpus from Greek into Latin, thereby making widely available the dialogues that attributed cosmic powers to the human mind and soul. Meanwhile, Pico wrote his famous 900 theses, which included arguments about Kabbalistic methods of accessing divine knowledge. Both were dabbling in areas that, centuries later, would be seen as stepping stones to modern occultism and parapsychology. Key figures of note in late medieval, early Renaissance: psychic tradition, Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa, 1486–1535, author of 3 books of occult philosophy, providing a systematic exposition of Renaissance magic, blending astrology, elemental spirits, and angelic powers. He was rumored to possess a demonic black dog. Popular lore likely confused it with his actual pet. Johannes Trithemius, 1462–1516, a Benedictine abbot who wrote on cryptography and spiritual communication, particularly in his Steganographia, which some read as a manual of angelic contact disguised as a codebook. Nostradamus, 1503–1566, the French seer whose cryptic quatrains, published in Les Prophéties, continue to fascinate believers in prophecy. While not academically respected in his time, he was a physician by training. His enduring popularity underscores a broader Renaissance fascination with prognostication, miracles, witch hunts, and the equivocal medium. Even as Renaissance humanism spread, Europe remained deeply religious, and the line between miracle and maleficium, evil magic, was dangerously thin. On one hand, saints reportedly worked miracles, healing the sick, levitating, bilocating, and these phenomena were lauded as signs of divine favor. On the other, witches and heretics stood accused of malevolent sorcery, incurring persecutions that escalated in the 16th and 17th centuries. This climate created a paradoxical environment for budding psychic or mediumistic phenomena. If a devout nun claimed to receive visions of the Virgin Mary, it might be celebrated as piety. But if a laywoman in a rural village described seeing the future or communing with spirits, it could invite allegations of witchcraft, leading to torturous interrogations or worse. Thus, by the end of the medieval period, and on the cusp of the broader Renaissance, Europe was a place where the supernatural was both revered and feared. Church authority demanded orthodoxy, even as intellectuals, mystics, and local folk traditions continued exploring forms of prophecy, spirit contact, and occult knowledge. This simmering tension would erupt into new forms, some recognized and institutionalized, others pushed to the fringes, in the centuries that followed. Part 4. The Enlightenment and the Rise of Modern Spiritualism, 17th–19th centuries. The dawn of the Enlightenment, late 17th to 18th centuries, heralded an age of reason, scientific inquiry, and skepticism toward established religious authority. Paradoxically, it was also a time when fascination with the supernatural took on new forms. Ghost stories abounded, secret societies flourished, and certain individuals, mesmerists, mediums, and clairvoyants, captured the public imagination with the promise of bridging worlds seen and unseen. From witch trials to scientific curiosity. By the late 17th century, witch hunts in Western Europe had begun to wane, partly due to growing skepticism about the veracity of witchcraft allegations. Intellectuals like Thomas Hobbes and John Locke argued that claims of spectral evidence and demonic pacts were incompatible with rational philosophy. Meanwhile, deists and early Enlightenment thinkers posited a universe governed by natural laws, leaving little room for active supernatural intervention. However, this shift did not extinguish interest in psychic or spiritual phenomena, it merely reframed it. Rather than attributing apparitions to demons or saints, investigators increasingly sought natural explanations. Sometimes they saw them as illusions, but other times they proposed novel theories of how the human mind or the animal spirit might accomplish feats once deemed miraculous. Mesmerism and the psychology of the supernatural. A pivotal figure in this intersection of science and mysticism was Franz Anton Mesmer, 1734–1815. An Austrian physician, Mesmer proposed the existence of a fluid-like force he called animal magnetism. He claimed that by manipulating this force, he could cure illnesses and induce trance states in his patients. Mesmer's theatrical demonstrations, in which subjects convulsed, swooned, or entered cataleptic states, captivated Europe's high society. Though Mesmer's theories were eventually discredited by a royal commission in France, including Benjamin Franklin as one of the investigators, mesmerism did not disappear. Instead, it evolved, influencing the development of hypnotism, James Braid, 1840s, and shaping nascent ideas about the power of the subconscious mind. Mesmerists also reported phenomena akin to clairvoyance, where entranced subjects claimed to see distant locations or diagnose illnesses they had never encountered. Emanuel Swedenborg, the scientist turned seer. Among the Enlightenment-era figures who bridged science and the paranormal, few stand out like Emanuel Swedenborg, 1688–1772. A Swedish polymath, Swedenborg excelled in mining, engineering, and anatomy. Then, in his mid-50s, he experienced a profound spiritual awakening, claiming direct communication with angels and spirits. Over the next 2 decades, he wrote extensively about his journeys through the afterlife, describing heaven, hell, and a spirit world with astonishing detail. Swedenborg's revelations influenced a wide array of thinkers, from William Blake to Arthur Conan Doyle. He offered a model in which the material and spiritual realms interpenetrated, suggesting humans could develop faculties to perceive the other side. Though mainstream Enlightenment thought dismissed him as delusional, he laid groundwork for future spiritual movements, especially in America. Revolutionary America and the seeds of spiritualism. Across the Atlantic, the young United States combined Puritan, deist, and Enlightenment influences with a frontier spirit open to new religious movements. By the early 19th century, transcendentalists like Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau proposed that humans could commune directly with the Oversoul or divine presence, bypassing traditional church doctrine. This intellectual climate was fertile ground for the explosion of spiritualism in the mid-19th century. The official spark came in 1848, in the small town of Hydesville, New York, where 2 sisters, Kate and Margaret Fox, claimed to communicate with a spirit through rapping sounds in their home. News of the Hydesville knockings spread like wildfire, and soon public séances became a widespread phenomenon. The rise of mediumship. Spiritualist mediums, often women, would go into trance states, relaying messages allegedly from deceased loved ones. The practice quickly gained popularity in both the United States and the United Kingdom. Parlor rooms filled with curious attendees, eager to witness table tipping, automatic writing, and spirit photography. Key figures emerged in the movement, including Emma Harding Britten, 1823–1899, a British medium and orator who helped organize the spiritualists into a cohesive community. Cora L.V. Scott, 1840–1923, one of the youngest mediums, who at age 15 delivered complex discourses while in trance. Daniel Douglas Home, 1833–1886, a controversial Scottish medium known for alleged levitations, including incidents where witnesses claimed he floated out a window in London and back through another. These mediums often operated in an ambiguous space, combining genuine conviction with the pressures of public spectacle. While many sitters found comfort in the possibility of life after death, skeptics abounded, exposing fraudulent practices like hidden contraptions for producing rapping sounds or accomplices disguised as spirits. Allan Kardec and Spiritism. Across the Atlantic in France, a teacher named Hippolyte Léon Denisard Rivail, better known by his pen name Allan Kardec, systematized spiritualist ideas in his influential works, The Spirit's Book, 1857, and The Book on Mediums, 1861. Kardec's Spiritist doctrine provided codified instructions for conducting séances and moral philosophy, gleaned from discarnate intelligences. Kardec's Spiritism, distinct from Anglo-American spiritualism in its emphasis on reincarnation, found a strong foothold in Brazil, where it remains influential. Kardec's measured approach to spirit communication attempted to imbue it with a scientific veneer, claiming that if the spirit's messages were consistent and verifiable, the phenomenon deserved serious study. Skepticism, celebrity, and the birth of parapsychology. While spiritualism thrived, its sensational aspects attracted both flamboyant showmen and earnest investigators. By the late 19th century, prominent scientists like William Crookes, a renowned chemist and physicist, and Alfred Russel Wallace, co-developer of the theory of evolution, investigated mediums. Crookes famously tested the medium Florence Cook and concluded she could materialize a spirit form named Katie King. To many in the scientific community, Crookes's findings were a disastrous lapse in judgment. To spiritualists, they were vindication. Meanwhile, the celebrated magician Harry Houdini, 1874-1926, launched a crusade against fraudulent mediums after the death of his mother. Disillusioned by mediums who claimed to channel his mother's spirit, Houdini exposed elaborate séance tricks, using his expertise in stage illusions to detect hidden wires, trapdoors, and sleight of hand. In 1882, the Society for Psychical Research, SPR, was founded in London by a group of scholars, including physicist William Barrett, philosopher Henry Sidgwick, and writer Frederick W. H. Myers, to systematically investigate psychic phenomena, telepathy, apparitions, and mediumship under controlled conditions. The SPR's rigorous approach laid the groundwork for modern parapsychology, establishing terms like telepathy, coined by Myers in 1882, and encouraging systematic data collection. The mystery of Eusapia Palladino. Among the mediums tested by the SPR was Eusapia Palladino, 1854-1918, an Italian medium who produced astounding physical phenomena. Tables levitated, musical instruments floated, and sitters felt invisible hands. Investigators were enthralled, but repeated allegations of fraud cast a cloud over her feats. In well-controlled conditions, Palladino's success rates dropped, though not to zero. Researchers such as Cesare Lombroso, the Italian criminologist, and Enrico Morselli wrote in her defense, suggesting that some real phenomena might coexist with trickery. This highlights a theme persistent in psychic research. Phenomena that appear genuine in uncontrolled settings often fail under strict scrutiny. Yet total dismissals rarely convinced devotees who insisted that ephemeral, delicate forces did not manifest on demand. Madame Blavatsky and the Theosophical Society. Another influential figure of the late 19th century was Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, 1831-1891, co-founder of the Theosophical Society, 1875. Blavatsky claimed to be in contact with secret masters residing in Tibet, from whom she received esoteric teachings. Her massive work, The Secret Doctrine, 1888, wove Eastern mysticism, spiritual evolution, and Western esotericism into a cosmology that captured the Victorian imagination. Though she too was dogged by accusations of fraud, most famously in the 1885 report by the SPR describing certain miracle letters as forgeries, Blavatsky's ideas spread globally. Theosophy influenced subsequent occult movements, including the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, and seeded elements of what would become the modern New Age movement. Ghost clubs and the canonical hauntings. Simultaneously, ghost clubs, informal groups devoted to investigating haunted houses, proliferated in Britain. Stories such as the Brown Lady of Rainham Hall, famously captured in a 1936 photograph, or the Borley Rectory, labelled the most haunted house in England by investigator Harry Price, entered public law. These hauntings usually involved apparitions, unexplained footsteps, and poltergeist-like activity. While mediums were sometimes called in for help, investigators increasingly tried to document these phenomena using photography, temperature gauges, and other emerging technologies, a precursor to modern ghost hunting shows. By the close of the 19th century, the seeds of modern paranormal investigation had been sown. Spiritualism had exploded across the West, generating both fervent believers and committed debunkers. The intellectual climate allowed for an unprecedented mix of scientific, religious, and mystical discourses on psychic phenomena. Mediums and investigators alike occupied the front pages of newspapers, fueling a debate that would intensify in the next century, particularly as science advanced to examine the complexities of the human mind and consciousness. Part 5. The early 20th century. Science, psychical research, and famous cases. The early 20th century was marked by rapid technological and social changes. The automobile, the airplane, the First World War, and the rise of mass communication via radio and film. In the midst of this modern transformation, interest in the paranormal persisted. A new wave of investigators, mediums, and skeptics emerged, informed by both the scientific method and the still strong public fascination with ghosts, spirits, and psychic powers. Foundations of Parapsychology, J.B. Rhine. One of the most pivotal figures in bringing psychic phenomena into an academic setting was Joseph Banks Rhine, 1895-1980. Originally a botanist, Rhine, along with his wife Louisa Rhine, began experimental investigations of extrasensory perception, ESP, at Duke University under the mentorship of psychologist William McDougall. Rhine popularized the use of Zener cards, bearing simple symbols such as circles, squares, and waves, to test for telepathy and clairvoyance in controlled laboratory conditions. His 1934 book, Extrasensory Perception, reported statistically significant results, suggesting some subjects guessed card symbols at rates exceeding chance. Rhine coined terms like ESP and PSI, a general term for paranormal mental phenomena, setting the stage for parapsychology as a recognized, if controversial, discipline. While critics pointed to flawed methodologies or potential biases, Rhine's work grabbed headlines and prompted other universities to tentatively explore parapsychological research. Over time, refined protocols emerged, including double-blind conditions and peer review. Even so, mainstream psychology remained largely skeptical. Between two wars, mediums and public figures. In the interwar period, spiritualist mediums continued to be household names, especially in Britain. Grace Cook, for instance, claimed trance communication with a spirit guide named White Eagle, forming the basis for the White Eagle Lodge, a mystical Christian-influenced group that survives to this day. Meanwhile, literary figures dabbled in psychical research or spiritualism. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, creator of Sherlock Holmes, became an ardent defender of spiritualism after his son's death in World War I. He famously clashed with magician and escape artist Harry Houdini, who insisted mediums were frauds preying on grieving families. Their public debates enthralled the press. The case of the Cottingley fairies underscores the era's credulity and controversy. In 1917, two young girls, Elsie Wright and Frances Griffiths, produced photographs apparently showing them with diminutive fairy beings. Doyle championed these images as evidence of the supernatural. Decades later, the cousins admitted that most of the photos were hoaxes, though one girl cryptically maintained that one photograph was genuine. Poltergeists and hauntings. Reports of poltergeist activity, unexplained knockings, object movements, and physical disturbances remained a staple of early 20th century paranormal lore. Psychical researchers from the SPR studied such cases carefully. One notable investigation involved the Thornton Heath poltergeist, 1938, Surrey, England, where a family claimed furniture moved on its own and walls vibrated with pounding noises. Investigators found no conclusive evidence of trickery, though the phenomenon ceased suddenly after a few months. In the United States, the 1920s and 1930s saw a rise in ghost hunters who combined existing spiritualist practices with modern gadgetry, cameras, electromagnetic devices, and reel-to-reel audio recorders. While inconclusive, these amateur attempts at documentation prefigured the tech-savvy ghost hunting subculture that would bloom decades later. Edgar Cayce, the Sleeping Prophet. A unique figure in American psychic history was Edgar Cayce, 1877-1945, known as the Sleeping Prophet. A devout Christian from Kentucky, Cayce entered trance states during which he delivered readings on health, past lives, and spiritual matters. His remedies often involved simple dietary or lifestyle changes, but he also spoke of reincarnation and Atlantis, concepts foreign to his conservative upbringing. Over 14,000 transcripts of Cayce's readings exist, maintained by the Association for Research and Enlightenment, RA, in Virginia Beach. While mainstream medicine dismissed Cayce's methods, some individuals found relief or at least comfort in his prescriptions. Skeptics pointed out that failed or vague predictions were glossed over by believers, while the occasional accurate hits were celebrated as proof of clairvoyance. Regardless, Casey's influence on the American metaphysical landscape remains profound, impacting later channelers in the New Age movement. Upton Sinclair's telepathy experiments. Pulitzer Prize-winning author Upton Sinclair ventured into psychic testing with his book Mental Radio, 1930. Together with his wife Mary Craig Sinclair, who believed she had telepathic abilities, they conducted experiments where Mary attempted to draw images that Upton visualized in a separate room. Sinclair documented hits and misses alike, concluding that some unknown mental faculty was at work. Albert Einstein wrote a supportive foreword, albeit expressing cautious intrigue rather than outright endorsement. Skeptics and magicians, the tradition continues. Houdini passed away in 1926, but his mantle of paranormal debunking was taken up by others, most notably the stage magician James Randi, born Randall James Hamilton Zwingli in 1928. Randi would rise to prominence in the latter half of the 20th century, but his early years were already marked by a keen interest in unmasking fraud. Skeptics argued that many mediums employed cold reading, hot reading, acquiring information beforehand, and subtle psychological cues. Seemingly paranormal feats, they insisted, were illusions reliant on a subject's willingness to believe. This tension between open-minded investigation and critical debunking would define much of the psychic debate going forward. The impact of world wars and a global shift. World War I had already sparked a renewed interest in contacting the dead due to massive casualties. World War II, 1939-1945, reinforced the impetus. Many bereaved sought solace in mediums, hoping for word from a fallen soldier or reassurance of an afterlife. Simultaneously, the horrors of the Holocaust and the atomic bomb triggered existential questions, pushing some intellectuals to explore alternative philosophies and esoteric doctrines for meaning in a seemingly chaotic world. By mid-century, Western societies were thus primed for the next phase, a mix of academic research, sensational media coverage, and the cross-pollination of Eastern mysticism. Part 6. The Late 20th Century. Remote Viewing, the New Age, and the Skeptical Renaissance. The post-war era saw an unprecedented acceleration of scientific breakthroughs, from nuclear energy to space exploration, but it also nurtured the growth of alternative spiritual movements and occult revivals. The late 20th century witnessed government-sponsored psychic research, the dawn of the New Age subculture, and a highly visible skeptic movement determined to root out fraud and pseudoscience. Government Psi programs, Stargate and remote viewing. A lesser-known, yet historically significant chapter in psychic research was funded by the US government during the Cold War. Concerned about reports of Soviet Psi research, agencies such as the CIA and DIA sponsored programs to investigate remote viewing, the alleged ability to psychically perceive distant or hidden targets. Among these initiatives, Project Stargate 1978-1995 at the Stanford Research Institute, SRI, enlisted physicists Russell Targ and Harold Putoff to test subjects like Ingo Swann, who claimed to describe hidden locations or objects. At times, remote viewers seemed to produce surprisingly accurate sketches of military installations or Soviet submarines. Critics argued the data was cherry-picked or that random hits were exaggerated, and an official CIA review eventually concluded the program did not yield actionable intelligence. Nevertheless, Project Stargate remains a striking example of official interest in psychic phenomena at the highest levels of national security. The New Age explosion. The 1960s counterculture, with its embrace of Eastern spirituality and psychedelic exploration, laid fertile ground for the New Age movement in the 1970s and 1980s. Emphasizing personal transformation, holistic health, and direct spiritual experience, the New Age scene popularized everything from crystal healing and aura reading to channeling ascended masters. Prominent channelers like J.Z. Knight, who claimed to speak for a 35,000-year-old Lemurian warrior named Ramtha, drew thousands to workshops promising spiritual enlightenment and practical life advice. Workshops on astral projection, past life regression, and energy work became commonplace in alternative centers throughout the United States and Europe. Not all of it was fringe. Best-selling books like James Redfield's The Celestine Prophecy, 1993, introduced millions to quasi-mystical theories of synchronicity and spiritual evolution. Simultaneously, the human potential movement, exemplified by places like the Esalen Institute in California, investigated the boundaries of consciousness through encounter groups, gestalt therapy, and transpersonal psychology, occasionally interweaving psychic research. Parapsychology enters academia and faces challenges. During this period, parapsychology labs sprang up in universities, most famously the Division of Parapsychology at Duke University, later moved to the Rhine Research Center. Researchers employed increasingly sophisticated methodologies, including the Ganzfeld experiments, sensory deprivation tests for telepathy. Some meta-analyses indicated small but statistically significant effects, fueling debate over whether PSI was genuine or a product of experimenter bias, optional stopping, or other methodological pitfalls. Funding remained a significant challenge. Mainstream science organizations typically viewed parapsychology with suspicion or outright rejection, citing the lack of replicable results under tight controls. Still, believers persisted, forming societies, attending conferences, and publishing in specialized journals such as the Journal of Parapsychology and the Journal of the Society for Psychical Research. Uri Geller, the spoon-bending phenomenon. The 1970s saw the meteoric rise of Uri Geller, an Israeli performer who claimed psychic abilities, most famously demonstrated by bending spoons and keys with minimal apparent force. Geller performed on television worldwide, drawing huge audiences. Many believed he had genuine powers, while skeptics like James Randi insisted the tricks were straightforward illusions. Geller's feats were tested in laboratory conditions, including by physicists at SRI. Some reported that Geller performed successfully, while others claimed the conditions were insufficiently controlled. Ultimately, Geller became emblematic of the psychic entertainer, someone whose claims of paranormal ability collided directly with stage magic and illusions. James Randi and the skeptical movement. Easily one of the 20th century's most influential skeptics, James Randi waged a public campaign against paranormal claims, offering a cash prize, ultimately reaching $1 million, to anyone who could demonstrate psychic or supernatural abilities under controlled test conditions. Despite thousands of applicants, no one passed the preliminary testing. Randi's exposés were dramatic. He revealed how televangelists used hidden earpieces and pre-collected information to fake faith healing. He challenged homeopathy, psychic surgery, and aura reading, often employing stage magic methods to replicate purported supernatural feats. A hallmark of Randi's approach was his demonstration that scientists, being untrained in the methods of deception, could be easily fooled by magicians. The repeated failure of any claimant to win the Randi Prize bolstered the skeptical position in the court of public opinion. High-profile hauntings and the paranormal media boom. The late 20th century also produced iconic haunted house cases that captured public attention, fueled in part by tabloid newspapers and Hollywood. The Amityville Horror, 1975, became a cultural phenomenon after George and Kathy Lutz claimed demonic forces plagued their Long Island home. Investigations uncovered inconsistencies in their stories, and some labeled the case a hoax. Yet the book and subsequent films spawned a franchise, embedding the narrative in pop culture. Other cases were less sensational, but more meticulously studied, such as the Enfield Poltergeist, 1977-1979, in North London, where two young girls' experiences with moving furniture and disembodied voices drew the attention of SPR investigators Maurice Grosse and Guy Leon Playfair. While many suspected trickery, Grosse and Playfair remained partly convinced something genuine had occurred. Television shows such as In Search of, hosted by Leonard Nimoy, and later Unsolved Mysteries, introduced paranormal topics, UFOs, ghosts, psychic detectives, to mainstream audiences. By the dawn of the 21st century, the paranormal was no longer a whispered curiosity. It was big business in entertainment, with millions tuning in to watch ghost hunting teams and mediums like John Edward or Teresa Caputo demonstrate cold reading on national TV. Part 7. The 21st Century, technology, viral phenomena, and continued debate. Entering the 21st century, our world is more interconnected than ever before. The internet, social media, and rapid globalization have produced new platforms for both believers and skeptics to share experiences, claims, and counterclaims about the paranormal. Smartphones have become ubiquitous ghost hunting tools, capturing orbs, EVPs, electronic voice phenomena, and supposed apparitions. On the other hand, digital manipulation tools and clickbait culture fuel skepticism about the authenticity of viral evidence. Modern paranormal investigations. Ghost hunting reality shows, Ghost Hunters, Ghost Adventures, Most Haunted, dominate certain cable channels, featuring teams that use EMF detectors, thermal cameras, and spirit boxes to detect anomalies. Critics note that such tech is rarely designed or calibrated for paranormal detection, making false positives likely. Still, the popularity of these shows attests to enduring public fascination. Online forums and social media groups allow amateurs to share stories and footage, seeking crowdsourced analysis. A shaky video of a shadowy figure in a hallway can rack up millions of views. Whether they are hoaxes, illusions, or legitimate anomalies is hotly debated, yet the phenomenon continues to thrive. The ongoing work of parapsychologists. Academic parapsychology persists, albeit on the fringes of university research. Institutions like the University of Edinburgh's Coastler Parapsychology Unit and the University of Virginia's Division of Perceptual Studies investigate areas such as near-death experiences, reincarnation research, and psi phenomena. Methods have become more rigorous. Random number generators, sophisticated statistical models, and improved blinding techniques are standard. Investigators like Dr. Dean Radin at the Institute of Noetic Sciences publish studies on presentiment, the idea that the human body reacts to future stimuli before it happens, and psychophysiological correlations in group settings. While mainstream acceptance remains low, parapsychologists argue that persistent small effect sizes across many studies warrant serious investigation into psi. Psychic mediums in the Internet age. Psychic hotlines have largely been replaced by psychic apps and online platforms where mediums offer readings via video calls or text messages. Celebrity mediums such as Tyler Henry in the United States or Sally Morgan in the UK still pack theatres or host television shows. Accusations of cold reading and data mining from social media follow them, yet their clientele remains robust, suggesting people continue to seek evidence of life after death. Big data and new avenues of research. Emerging technologies hold promise and peril for exploring psychic claims. Artificial intelligence can analyze vast amounts of data, potentially identifying patterns that might hint at precognitive phenomena or telepathy. Conversely, advanced image and audio editing software can create convincing hoaxes more easily than ever. The question remains, if genuine psychic or supernatural phenomena exist, can we isolate them from the deluge of fabricated digital content? This tension between possibility and fakery is a defining feature of the modern paranormal landscape. Frauds, controversies, and unresolved mysteries. Despite decades of investigations, high-profile frauds continue to surface. Some mediums and ghost hunters are caught staging phenomena or plagiarizing historical details. Professional debunkers reveal methods of psychic scams, from planted microphones to sophisticated online research about clients. At the same time, certain cases remain unresolved, capturing the public's imagination. The Battersea poltergeist, 1956-1968, in London, recently revisited in BBC podcasts, with new interviews and analysis of old evidence. The Phoenix Lights, 1997, a mass UFO sighting over Arizona, which some interpret as extraterrestrial or dimensional visitors and others dismiss as military flares. Near-death experience, NDE studies, where patients report veridical perceptions during cardiac arrest, fueling debate over consciousness beyond the brain. These mysteries, whether ultimately debunked or validated, showcase humanity's enduring quest for answers about what lies beyond our material existence. Conclusion: a legacy of wonder and inquiry. From the earliest Egyptian tomb inscriptions to the latest debates on social media, the human desire to peek behind the veil of mortality and perceive the unseen has remained remarkably constant. We have gone from the oracles of Ammon and Delphi to remote viewing labs at Stanford, from medieval necromancers to mediums on live television, from poltergeist accounts in 19th century parlors to ghost hunting expeditions streamed worldwide. In each era, key personalities, priests, seers, philosophers, scientists, showmen, shaped the evolving narrative of the paranormal, walking the tightrope between belief and skepticism. Fraud and delusion have always been part of the story, spurring a countercurrent of critical inquiry and scientific attempts at replicable, controlled investigation. Even as technology provides new tools and new pitfalls, the underlying questions remain the same. Is there more to reality than meets the eye? Does consciousness survive death? Can the human mind tap into hidden forces or knowledge? The history of the paranormal and psychic is, in essence, a history of human curiosity. It reflects our refusal to accept that everything worth knowing can be measured by conventional instruments. Whether one leans toward open-minded acceptance or rigorous doubt, the tapestry of stories, personalities, hoaxes, and potential breakthroughs ensures that our fascination endures. Indeed, as long as we remain mortal beings, the possibility of connecting with worlds beyond will continue to captivate us, an eternal mirror to our hopes, fears, and most profound mysteries.